Chapter 16. On the fourth day out of Coldhaven, they arrived at the Wedge. It was late afternoon and the sky hung grey and oppressive across the land. Rain fell in steady sheets, as it had fallen for 3 days past, and the Anar was sodden and cold. Trees stripped bare of autumn colour shone black and stark through trailers of mist that slipped like wraiths across the deepening dusk. In the empty, sullen forest, there was only silence. All day the land had been rising in a steady, gentle slope that lifted now into a mass of cliffs and ridgelines. The silver river churned through their mist, swollen by the rains, cradled within a deep and winding gorge. Mountains rose up about the gorge and blocked it away with walls of cliffs that were sheer and stripped of trees and shrubs. Shadowed by mist and coming night, the silver river was soon lost from sight entirely. It was the gorge that the dwarfs had named the Wedge. The members of the little company came high upon its southern slope, heads bent against the wind, cloaks wrapped tightly about their bodies as the cold and the rain seeped through. Silence hung over everything, the roar of the wind sweeping from their ears, all sound save its own, and there was a deep and pervasive sense of solitude in each man's mind. The company walked through shrub and pine, making its way upward with slow, steady progress, feeling the whole of the skyline close down about as the afternoon faded and night began to creep slowly in. Foraker led the way. This was his country, and he was the most familiar with its tricks. Garrett Yaks followed, as black and hard as the trees they slipped through. Then came Slanter, Year, and Edane Lessedell. Giant Help brought up the rear. No one spoke. In the stillness of their march, the minutes dragged by. They had passed over a gentle rise and come down into a stand of glistening spruce when Foraker suddenly stopped, listened, then motioned them all into the tree. With a word to Garrett Yaks, the dwarf slipped from them and disappeared into the mist and rain. They waited in silence for his return. He was gone for a long time. When he finally reappeared, it was from a different direction entirely. Signaling for them to follow, he led them deep into the tree. There they knelt in a circle about him. "Gnomes," he said quietly. Water ran from his bald head into his thick beard, curling in its mass. "At least 100. They've secured the bridge." There was shocked silence. The bridge was in the middle of supposedly safe country that was protected by an entire army of dwellers stationed at the fortress at Kapal. If there were gnomes this far west and this close to Coldhaven, what had befallen that army? "Can we go around?" Garrett Yak asked at once. Foraker shook his head. "Not unless you want to lose at least 3 days. The bridge is the only passage over the Wedge. If we don't cross here, we have to backtrack down out of these mountains and circle south through the wilderness." Rain spattered down their faces in the silence that followed. "We don't have 3 days to waste," the weapons master said finally. "Can we get past the gnomes?" Foraker shrugged. "Maybe, when it's dark." Garrett Yaks nodded slowly. "Take us up for a look." They climbed into the rock, circling through pine, spruce, and shrub. Boulders damp and slick with rain and mist deepened night. Silent shadows, they worked their way ahead, Foraker in the lead as they crept cautiously into the gloom. Then a flicker of firelight shone through the grey, its faint, lonely cast washed with rain. It slipped from beyond the rocks ahead of them. As one they crushed from its eyes and crawled slowly on, up to where they could peek above the rim of a ridgeline and look down. The sheer walls of the Wedge dropped away below, misted and rain-swept as the night came down. Spanning the massive drop was a sturdy trestle bridge, built of timber and iron, fastened to the cliff rock at a narrow, and pinioned with dwarf skill and engineering against the thrust and bite of the wind. On the near side of the bridge, a broad shelf ran back to the ridgeline, thinly forested and covered now by gnome watchfires and the shelter of makeshift leas and canvas tents. Gnomes huddled everywhere, about fires and shadowed knots, within the trees and tents silhouetted against the firelight, and along the shelf from ridgeline to bridge. On the far side of the gorge, nearly lost in the dark, a dozen more patrolled a narrow trail that ran back from the drop over a low rise to a broad forested slope that fell away 100 yards further on into the wilderness. At both ends of the trestle bridge, gnome hunters stood watch. The six who crashed upon the ridgeline studied the scene below for long moments, and then Garrett Yak signaled for them, all to withdraw into the shelter of a clump of boulders below. Once there, the weapons master turned to Held. "When it's dark, can we slip past?" The big man looked doubtful. "Maybe as far as the bridge." Garrett Yak shook his head. "That's not far enough. We have to get beyond the sentries." "One might do it," Foraker said slowly. "Crawl under the bridge, crawl along the braces. If we were quick enough, he could slip across, kill the sentries, and hold the bridge long enough for the others to follow." "Ah, this is madness!" Slanter exclaimed suddenly, his rough-shaved face shoving into view. "Even if you manage to make it somehow to the far side, past those dozen or so sentries, the rest will be after you in a minute. How will you escape them?" "Dwarf ingenuity," Foraker growled slowly. "We build things better than most, gnome. That bridge is rigged to collapse. Pull the pins on either side and the whole thing drops into the gorge." "How long to pull the pins?" Garrett Yak asked him. "A minute, maybe two. It's been expected for some time that the gnomes would try to flank Capel." He shook his head. "It worries me, though, that they've done it now and no one stopped them. They're bold to seize the bridges openly as this. And the way they've camped suggests they aren't much concerned about being caught from the other direction." He shook his head once more. "I'm worried for the army." Garrett Yak brushed the rain from his eyes. "Worry about them another time." He glanced quickly at the others. "Listen carefully. When it's dark, Help will lead us through the camp to the bridge. I'll cross underneath. When I dispose of the sentries, Elb and the gnome will cross with the Valman. Help, you and the elven prince use longbows to keep the gnomes on this side of the bridge until the pins are pulled. Then cross when you're called, and we'll drop the bridge." Elb Foraker, Help, and Adane Lessedale nodded wordlessly. "There's more than 100 gnome hunters down there," Slanter pointed out heatedly. "If anything goes wrong, we won't have a chance." Foraker looked coldly at the gnome. "That shouldn't bother you, should it? After all, you can pretend you're one of them." He glanced quickly at the gnome, but Slanter turned away without comment. Garrett Yax came to his feet. "No sound from here forward. Remember what we have to do." They climbed back onto the ridgeline, then huddled patiently within the rocks and watched as the night descended. An hour slipped away, then two. Still the weapons master kept them where they were. Darkness fell over the whole of the gorge, and the rain and the mist passed across it like a veil. The cold began to deepen, settling through them with numbing bitterness. Below, the fires of the gnome hunters grew brighter against the black. Then Garrett Yax brought up his arm, and the little company rose. They slipped from the rocks like bits of scattered night and began their descent toward the gnome encampment. They went one after another, Help leading the way, slow and cautious as he picked his path downward. The fires burned closer, and then voices became audible in the rush of wind and rain, low, guttural, and sounding of discomfort. The six forms crept past fire and tent, bent low within shadows that spread from rock and trees into the night. The company circled left about the encampment, and only Help's night vision kept them from wandering off the drop. The minutes slipped away, and the slow crawl through the enemy camp dragged on. Ye could smell food cooking as the wind blew the older back to his face. He could hear the voices of the gnomes, their laughter and grunts, and see the movement of the toughened bodies passing in the faint light of the fire. He tried hard not even to breathe, willing himself to become one with the night. And suddenly it occurred to him that if he wanted to, he really could become one with the night. He could use the Wishsong to make himself invisible. And then he realized that he had just stumbled on a better way to get them all across the bridge. But how was he going to let the others know what it was? They had crept to the edge of the gorge and were beyond the shelter of rocks and trees. Only the open face of the cliff stretched ahead. They edged forward, crouched low against the night. There were no fires here, and so they stayed hidden in the mist and the rain. Ahead, the bulk of the trestle bridge loomed through the dark, its wooden beams glistening with rain. No voices came softly from above, brief and cryptic, as the sentries hunched down within their cloaks and stared longingly at the warmth and cheer of the camp behind them. Silently, help took the company down beneath the bridge to where the supporting beams were anchored in the rock. Yards away, the empty depths of the Wedge opened in a monstrous chasm, wind howling through its cavernous stomach across the rock. They crouched in a knot, and Ye reached tentatively for Garrett Yak. The hard face swung about. Ye pointed to the weapons master, then to himself, then to the sentries above them on the bridge. Garrett Yak frowned. Ye pointed to his mouth and said soundlessly, "Gnome," and pointed again to each of them. The Wishsong can make the two of us appear as gnomes to the sentries, and we can cross without being stopped, he was trying to say. Should he whisper it? But no, the weapons master had said no one was to speak. The wind would carry the sound of their voices. It was too dangerous. Again, he made the same motions. The others crowded closer, glancing one another, as uneasily Ye continued to motion to Garrett Yak. Finally, the weapons master seemed to understand. He hesitated for a moment, then took Ye's arm in his own, pulled him close and pointed to the others, then to the bridge above. Could the Veilman disguise them all? Ye hesitated. He hadn't considered that. Did he possess strength enough to carry the disguise that far? It was dark, raining, and they were all cloaked and hooded. It would only be for a moment. He nodded that he could. Garrett braced him firmly with both hands, grey eyes fixed upon his own. Then he motioned the others to follow them up. All understood. The Veilman was going to use a Wishsong to get them across. They did not know how he was going to do that, but they had seen the power he commanded. Moreover, excepting only Slanter, and even he might have deferred to the other under those conditions. They trusted, implicitly, the judgment of Garrett Yax. If he believed in Ye, so would they. They rose in a knot from where they crouched hidden and walked boldly up the bluff rise toward the bridge. Before them, shadow forms huddled in idle conversation, aware suddenly of their approach. The gnome sentries turned. There were only three. Ye was already singing, his voice blending into the wind in a harsh, guttural song that whispered of gnome. For an instant, the gnomes seemed to hesitate, and a few brought their weapons up guardedly. Ye pushed harder, probing with the Wishsong to make them all appear as Slanter. The gnome tracker would surely think that I'm mad now, he thought fleetingly. Still he sang. Weapons lowered then, and the sentries stepped aside. A changing of the watch, a relief for those on the far side of the gorge. Ye and his companions left them, wandering, passing through them with faces lowered and cloaks wrapped close. They trooped onto the bridge, their booted feet thudding softly on the heavy wooden plank. Still, Ye sang, shading them all in gnome disguise. Then abruptly his voice faltered, drained by the use to which he had put it. But they were past the line of sentries now, lost in a shroud of mist and rain. To any eyes that might follow them. They reached the centre of the bridge, the wind howling past them and stinging with white. Hastily, Garrett Yax motioned for help and led down Elicidel to drop back. For just an instant, Ye had a fleeting glimpse of Slanter's face filled with wonder as he stared at the Veilman. Then Garrett Yax motioned both of them behind him, and with Elb Foraker at his side, started forward once more. They emerged from rain and night at the far side of the bridge, little more than hooded shadows to the gnomes, who kept watch there. Ye's throat tightened. This time, there could be no Wishsong to see them safely past. There were too many. A gathering of faces turned at their approach. For a few uncertain moments, the sentries simply stared at the figures who came at them, surprised by their appearance, yet certain that only gnomes could come from the encampment they knew to hold the far cliff. Then, before surprise could turn to alarm, or size and shape could properly register, Gary Yax and Foraker were upon them, short sword and long knife glistening in the night. Half a dozen gnomes lay dead before the others even realized what was happening. Their attackers swept into their midst, and now shouts of alarm broke wildly from their throats. Calling to those on the far side, answering cries came back a moment later. Yer and Slanter crouched low at the far end of the bridge, watching the battle before them as it swept into the dark, hearing disembodied cries rise all about them. The sharp twang of elven ash bows sounded above the rush of wind and rain, and more gnome hunters began to die. Then a single gnome burst from the darkness before them, bloodied and disabled, his yellow face frantic in dim light. He rushed onto the bridge, a two-edged axe in his hand. He saw Slanter and stopped, confused. Then he caught sight of Yer and sprang forward. The Veilman stumbled back, trying vainly to protect himself, so startled by the other's appearance that he momentarily forgot about the long knife he carried at his waist. The gnome howled, weapon lifting, and Yer threw up his hands protectively. "Knuckle boy, you!" Slanter cried out. The gnome screamed in rage, and again the axe came up. Slanter's sword swept down, and the attacker dropped to his knees, dying. Slanter drew back, a shocked look on his rough face. Then he had Yer by the arm, yanking him to his feet and pulling him ahead until they were clear of the bridge. Abruptly old Foraker appeared. Without a word he dropped below the trestle bridge to where the pins that held it fixed were concealed. With frantic motions he began to pull them free. Renewed cries sounded from the centre of the bridge. Booted feet raced into the wooden planks, and from out of the mist and night Hilton and Dane Elizadale burst. Fell upon the bridge, they turned, and the great ash bows hummed. Gnomes howled in pain in the dark behind them. Again and again the bows hummed, and more cries rose. The sound of running feet disappeared back into the night. "Hurry with those pins," Help bellowed sharply. Gary Yax appeared now, joining Foraker beneath the bridge. Together they knocked the remaining pins free, one after the other, all but two. Again the thudding of booted feet rang out. "Halt!" the weapons master called a moment later, scrambling back onto the ledge. Foraker was a step behind him. "Get off the bridge." The bordermen and Elvenprince raced out of the night, bent low against the wind. Spears and arrows flew after them. Lighter and quicker, Edane was first off the bridge, springing past the crouched forms of Yer and Slanter. "Now!" Foraker called over to Garrett Yak. They stood opposite each other, pry bars anchored and hooks fixed to the last of the concealed pins. As one, they pulled them free. In the same instant, Helt sprang clear of the bridge. With a groan, the wooden beams wrenched free, and their pinnings, and the bridge began to sink downward into the night. Screams rose from the throats of the gnomes still caught upon its length, but it was too late for them. The bridge dropped away with a sudden heave, falling downward into the mist and rain, spinning away against the cliffs until it broke free of the far side, dropped into the gorge, and was lost. On the northern cliffs of the Wedge, 6 shadowed forms slipped swiftly into the darkness and were gone.